Morgan referred earlier to us that Dan Isenberg will be joining us via the wonders of modern technology, and hopefully we'll see him shortly. Here we are. Hello, Dan.
I'm here.
Well done.
Can you hear?
Yeah, now I just need to introduce you. Dan has no short bio. It's a fantastic and exclusive list of achievements and accolades. However, it's safe to say that he spent his career and much time nurturing entrepreneurial spirit, honing the science of scale-up. Puts his money where his mouth is, investing in and mentoring people and organisations wishing to grow and scale up. I could go on, but he'll tell you more himself. So may I welcome the founding executive of the Babson Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Platform and Adjunct Professor at Colombia Business School, live from Boston, by the wonders of digital technology. Dan, welcome and great to meet you again. All yours.
Good. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Can I just see a show of hands to make sure that we're communicating? Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wow.
We got two cameras this time.
That's impressive. Okay, great. Obviously we're taking a little bit of a risk here and relying on the network in between. It goes over. Let's give it a try. I've also given you a little bit of an exercise to prepare, which is a short form self-assessment. And I don't know, have every one of you had a chance to fill out this little piece of paper? Because what I'd like to do is, great, wonderful, thank you. What I'd like to do is have this entire 30 minutes be interactive, and that's the second risky thing, because I'm not there and you're not here, but let's give it a try. We did it last time and it worked pretty well. And the way I'd like to propose to do it is, first of all, I want to get a show of hands based on your scores, and hopefully you've had a chance to tally your scores. And I'm just going to ask you to give me the global total score that's at the bottom of the sheet. And I'll ask you to do it in a certain way by a show of hands. So do you have your scores tallied up there?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Yep, we do.
Okay. It's pretty simple arithmetic. And the maximum score possible is 36, which is 3 times 12. And so what I'd like to do is, first of all, see a show of hands between 31 and 36. Have a total between 31 and 36, just a show of hands.
Show of hands, 31 to 36, yeah?
Oh dear.
No.
Interesting. And how many of you have between 26 and 30? 26 to 30.
Yeah, 3 or 4, yeah.
Like just a handful there.
Yeah.
How about 21 to 25?
Yeah, just about everybody else.
Well, let's see. How about 15 to 20?
Yeah, a few.
I see a couple of hands with 15 to 20, 4 or 5. And then those of you with less than 15, lower than 15. So there's I see one hand. And I see a pretty wide range.
Very honest.
And I'm not going to trust technology enough to have a discussion with you about your rankings. But what I'd like you to do is, for the next 5 minutes, very, very quickly, just get together with people at your table, share your scores, and then in just 5 minutes, and I realize that's not enough time, come up with one question. So there's one question at each table that comes out of the differences in the scores that you have. So just turn to the people in your table and share your scores and use those differences to generate a question that you have about the scale-up ecosystem in New Anglia. Does that make sense, Morgan? Have I confused everybody?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely fine.
And just take 5 minutes to do that. We'll use that to generate our conversation for 20 minutes or so.
So, gentlemen, we haven't seen that, and we haven't completed it. So you have we'll come and sit next to you.
Go in the company. You wouldn't know.
So, Morgan.
Hi, Dan.
One more minute? One more minute?
Yeah, 1 minute, yeah.
So, can I try to reconvene?
I think I think we're ready for the question. So,
okay, good. So,
Dan, if I was to get Sue here to go around to each table with the microphone, is that what you want?
yeah, we won't have a chance to go through all of the tables, but let's get going. Sure, I think it's a great idea.
Okay, put your hand up a table if you've got an answer.
Or a question.
Or a question, sorry. Question? Well, there's one over here, so we could take that one first.
Hi, I'm Leanne from...
Just speak closely to the microphone. I can't quite hear you.
Hi, I'm Leanne Case from Innovate UK. My question was about champions...
I'm not sure that microphone is working. Can we just swap?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, we'll get the communications right in a moment. Yeah.
That's a critical.
Alpha Bravo 1.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Leanne Case from Innovate UK. My question was, who are the leaders or champions
of New Anglia that everybody knows?
Well, I think that's more a question of for yourselves, right? I'll let you answer
Sorry,
that
it wasn't a question.
You meaning, I'll let you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, do we have it now? Perhaps, well, how about this middle table? You got a question?
Sorry,
No? Oh, yes, over here.
Hi, our question related to the fact that we saw that when it came to getting your stories in the news, there was a lot of features about the medium-sized businesses becoming even bigger and not a lot about the little guy. And I guess the question is how can the little guy get more PR coverage?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I can't give obviously a specific answer, but I think by giving the medium guys, as you call them, coverage, that encourages the smaller companies with big aspirations to get attention. And I think you have to work simultaneously, but with the media themselves, to help them understand how to identify when growth is happening underneath their radar. Because usually they're reporting growth that is very impressive, because that's what they do. And I think part of our job is to show them what growth looks like when it's small. I don't think it's so much about the little guy, but it's about the smaller companies that are actually having growth events, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these growth events happening all the time. And we don't recognize them, and if we don't recognize them, then certainly the media can't recognize them either. So I think that's back to the first comment or question about the champions in New Anglia. Obviously, I don't know who they are, but I think it's very important to begin to think about who they are. It's important for you to begin to identify who some of those champions are, and to encourage more and more people to communicate about growth and sort of champion growth. Champion is a verb, it's not just a noun. So anyway, let's get to some more questions. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Obviously, I think that communication is essential. Communicating about growth is an essential ingredient in any ecosystem that fosters growth. If you don't communicate about growth, it doesn't have an impact.
Hi Dan, Dave Roscoe from Footprint Digital. We all did our sheets independently here, but when we all laid them on the table, we found that there was a very consistent pattern. So under norms and encouragement, we'd scored significantly higher, and pretty much all of us, and I can't speak for everybody, but on this particular table, we seem to have scored much lower in the communication section. Is that something you see typical?
Well, it's certainly not unusual, and I've seen what I just said about communicating growth being an essential element of the ecosystem. I say that because I've been doing what I do in fostering entrepreneurship in regions for about a decade now. And one of the observations that really surprised me was that everywhere I go, there's an excuse for not communicating growth. It's a different excuse. It may be that we're modest people. And so because we're modest people, we don't want to toot our own horns. That may be one reason. In some places, it may be we're afraid of competition. So we don't want to toot our own horns because we're afraid that the competitors may also get some good ideas and compete with us. And so there are many excuses not communicate about growth. One of the reasons it's not an excuse is that people don't recognize it when it happens. So one of the things I think that you can all do is to take growth, which is very impressive, let's say, and break it into very small pieces, so that you're talking not just about the big headlines. This gets back to the question about the little guys, I think, to some extent, but you're also talking about the specific lead indicators, what we call growth events. So someone getting a new contract. Well, how did you start this meeting off today by telling 5 stories of your companies that got new contracts with specific customers, with specific amounts of money that this generated? Or did you start this meeting today by talking about the numbers of people that you've hired recently? Or did you talk today, this morning, about the new financing that you got? I'm willing to bet that you didn't. Maybe you did. If you did, then you're 1 out of 1,000 that do. But almost nowhere in the world do people tell the stories as a regular part of their lives. Tell the stories of growth. And I emphasize this because it's something very simple that you can implement tomorrow morning. But to do it, you have to realize that growth comes in very small pieces. Let's go on.
Okay.
This will come up again. Maybe some of the other tables had also communication-related questions or issues.
Do we have another table? In the middle table at the back. Have you got a question? Oh, yeah, right at the back.
Sorry, just gone the wrong way. Sorry. Oh, I'm afraid my bum's much bigger than that. Sorry. Thank you.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a question about entrepreneurship and education in the States compared to what we have in the UK. So the focus for young people in education is very much around the academic route, and now we have a plethora of apprenticeships as an alternative, but entrepreneurship, I think, is still seen as what someone else does. I'm interested to see how education and entrepreneurship is different stateside.
Well, I can't compare because I'm an expert on how it works in the UK, but there's a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship education from even grade school, and also in summer activities, the sort of non-formal education activities. There's a lot of education, a lot of exposure to starting companies, business ideas, and that sort of thing at all levels. But I'm going to say something that may be a little bit counterintuitive and perhaps controversial. I've been in some extraordinarily entrepreneurial environments, and two of the most entrepreneurial environments that I've really spent a lot of time in are Iceland, that may surprise you, and Israel, which may not surprise you that much. And in both of these places, entrepreneurship education per se was not in the critical path. Other kinds of education was in the critical path. So for example, first of all, education in general is a good thing. Second of all, education for taking initiative, for solving problems, for dealing with practical problems, that's important. Education in engineering and technical skills, that's important. Even though I've been an entrepreneurship educator myself and I've trained probably by now close to 2,000 entrepreneurs, many of whom have gone on and despite my teaching have been actually successful, there's only a little bit that you can actually, it's important, but there's only a little bit that you can actually teach people about, that's entrepreneurship education per se. Most of the skills that are useful for entrepreneurs are more generic skills. Innovation, risk-taking, solving problems, overcoming obstacles, being literate in technical and non-technical skills, being able to communicate well, and so on. You should feel free to disagree, but my own observation is that formal entrepreneurship education is a third or fourth order phenomenon. It tends to happen after there's already a lot taking place. So I'm not saying it's not important, but I don't think it's that much in the critical path as you say it is. Now you may all hate me.
I think we've got another question. Oh, right, okay.
Sorry, I have another question. Obviously, a lot of theory around innovation talks about co-location of clusters, like Michael Porter's theory of regional competitiveness. How relevant is that now? In Norfolk, the businesses I work with often talk about ability to attract staff to the region.
So that's a very simple question, but it's actually a really complicated question. It looks simple. And I see something else on the screen, just going to, okay, there it disappeared. So a couple of comments. First of all, clusters, so clusters mean different things for different people. And so formal cluster strategies are, again, I think, a second, third, and fourth order phenomenon. If you go back and read what Mike Porter himself wrote now 30 years ago about cluster strategies, he said that cluster strategies can only be formed after there's already business success. Clusters are not drivers of that initial success. In other words, you need entrepreneurship first, and the clusters can form around those entrepreneurial successes. The clusters per se will not drive the entrepreneurship, again, as a first order phenomenon. But having said that, this clustering phenomenon, not as a strategy, but the fact that companies from similar or related industries co-locate, I think that's really essential. And despite the fact that we have great technology such as Skype, and there's better technologies for communicating, of course, there are a lot more organizations that are distributed, but it's still, I think, very essential for people to be able to meet with each other. And in deciding, yes, we want to be stronger in manufacturing, or yes, we want to be stronger in artificial intelligence, or yes, we want to be stronger in advanced materials, the ability to actually talk about it with each other is important. So, did I answer your question?
Yes. Yes.
Part of it, not completely. And by the way, I'll say something. And I'll say something about innovation that I think is worth saying. Innovation and entrepreneurship are different phenomena. They're not the same. They're interrelated, but it's very important, I think, from a policy perspective and from a community perspective to look at them differently. Because I think innovation, there's two elements to innovation. One is it's a process. It's a process of creating something novel that works. It's not just an invention, which is something novel, but it has to work to be innovation. That's number one. But there's also such a thing as innovative assets, know-how, and intellectual property, and advanced equipment. These are what I call innovative assets. Now, entrepreneurs may use those and may not use those. But there's a lot of entrepreneurship that can get done, and it's extremely valuable entrepreneurship societally that does not rely on innovation. And again, those of you who didn't hate me because of what I said about education, you have the opportunity to hate me because of what I'm saying about innovation. It's possible to be, there are many, many, many examples of impactful entrepreneurship that doesn't have innovation at the heart of it. Now, eventually, to be competitive, if you're not innovative, you're not going to be competitive. So, anyway, obviously it's a very complicated topic, but I think it's useful to treat those things separately because in innovation, entrepreneurs look and they try to solve problems, social or economic problems or market problems, try to solve those. And they may rely on those innovative assets to do that, but they may not. They may just copy things to solve problems. That's okay. It can be very socially impactful. Generic pharmaceuticals, good example, generic pharmaceuticals. There's no innovation in generic pharmaceuticals, but they're hugely impactful generic pharmaceutical companies.
Dan, I probably can't see you from here on the podium, but I have to admit to being a foreigner. I'm an Australian, so when I come and live in the UK in 1986, I look at it almost as an outsider. And if I living in the middle of somewhere like Cambridge, there is a great understanding of what entrepreneurship means. And even in the country, there will be some icons of people who everybody would regard as an entrepreneur. And in Cambridge, you see entrepreneurship as probably a way of life. But that doesn't extend much further than that innovation hub. And when we move further away to cities in East Anglia like Norwich and Ipswich, which have got great examples of entrepreneurship, it's not part of the culture. And I guess, can you give us some guidelines as to actually how we ultimately raise the awareness of entrepreneurship and what those attributes are, and how we revere them, and how that encourages others to perhaps seek to be entrepreneurs or to recognise that they are?
Well, this comes back full circle to the 20 minutes ago we were talking about communication of growth events. I think that despite the fact that the public discourse may not recognize entrepreneurship in the rural areas, I'm absolutely sure that it exists under the radar. And the important thing is to identify it and begin to talk about it. But in order to talk about it, you have to recognize it. And to recognize it, you need to break it down into its small pieces. You know, I'm American, so we use baseball analogies. It's important to recognize the base hits, the singles, and not just look at the home runs with the bases loaded. It's not just about scoring the goal, let's say, in football. It's also about setting up the goal. It's also about having good defense. So recognizing those small events, the expanding capacity, the getting the new equipment, the hiring the new people, the getting a little bit more bank financing, the getting another customer, expanding, these little things, they happen all the time. They're happening underneath the radar and right in front of us all the time, even in the rural places that don't, or the less concentrated innovation hubs that don't garner all the attention. They are out there. And by recognizing them, identifying them, and then communicating about them, that also encourages it. It encourages it. You know, when I see, if I'm trying to decide, do I invest in growing my company, and I see people near me or hear about people near me in my community growing their companies, getting new contracts, they may be starting to export, that stimulates me. That stimulates my ambition. And I emphasize that because that's something, that, again, we can do tomorrow morning.
Dan?
Yes.
Morgan, we're going to have to wind up in a little, but I'm going to take the opportunity, as I've got the mic. I agree totally with you in terms of communication. I've been talking to the Scale Up Institute about scale-ups, so those that increase revenue or FTE 20% a year. There are 98 that we've agreed between us. That I'm looking at the list now, and there are some big names, but I didn't know they were scale-ups. They're not being communicated to the wider environment. So it's up to me now to get in touch with them and see if they can get them along to the groups like this and share their stories. So that was one eye-opener. But finally, we've got a question here from Justin Nevison Granger. How do we overcome, in the UK, the fear and shame of failure as a barrier to entrepreneurial risk-taking versus other economies? How do we in the UK, and I'm sure you've been in the UK, equate us to, say, the US or Israel or wherever else?
Yeah, so I think there's a failure, like a lot of things, it's a complex phenomenon. And first of all, if you're talking about failure or are you talking about making mistakes? There's a big difference, and sometimes we confuse them. And I think that entrepreneurs, believe it or not, abhor catastrophic failure. I've been an entrepreneur, and I've seen failures, and it's extraordinarily painful, depressing. It can influence your economics, and it can influence your feeling about yourself. And so, I think that kind of failure is actually to be avoided. But there's a difference between that being something to avoid and it being stigmatized. So I think from a societal point of view, it's very important, first of all, to take down the structural barriers to failure in terms of bankruptcy law, et cetera. And it's important to try to overcome the social stigma. And you do that by examples. Now, in terms of making mistakes, So, by the way, I have one more thing to say about failure. I don't think the way to overcome the fear of failure is to celebrate it. I think a better way to overcome the fear of failure is by teaching people how to be successful as entrepreneurs. Learn from role models how to be successful entrepreneurs, how to recognize they're going in the wrong direction as quickly as possible, having them get good mentoring. When they have failures, to fail as quickly as possible and get out as quickly as possible before they create real damage to themselves and their families. But now, in terms of making mistakes, that's also part of the culture. Is it okay to make mistakes? Is it okay to change course? Is it okay to say, you know what, I screwed up, it's the wrong product, let me try and fix it? And again, I think the examples, the stories, your meetings, your kind of community building goes a long way to changing the culture. And you don't change culture in big, you change it in small. You change culture in this gathering. You don't change culture in the city or in the region or in the country. You change culture piece by piece, right here.
Okay then, Dan, that's really interesting. I like the differentiation between mistakes and failure. Yes, there seems to be...
Difference.
Yeah, there's a big difference. I don't know if you're available later on. We've got to move on with a couple of presentations now.
Go ahead.
One from the British Business Bank and another one from Goldman Sachs. But there's a panel of speakers later on, probably about 3:30 here. I don't know, are you available or you've got other commitments?
Unfortunately, I have another commitment,
That's
so
fine.
I'm gonna beg off.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Dan. That was really informative. And
Well, good luck. I hope it was helpful, and at least the technology.
Can we?
But
Thank
can I
a
just say
round of applause, please.
Okay.
Yep. Hello.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dan.